Well, good morning. As Pastor Phil mentioned, start a new series today called The Game. And this happens to be my game right here. You know, there was this family that was playing this game one night, and as they sat around the table, they began to play, and money was changing hands, and there were deeds swapping out, and it was just getting intense, and the game was getting intense, and all of a sudden, one of the family members started getting an edge, and they started getting a little bit more property, putting on a little more hotels, a little more houses. They were rolling the dice, man, and everything was going their way, and they were raking in the money. They had most of the property on the board, and had motels and houses on those properties, and there were just a few that were left, and the other two family members were scraping and scrounging everything they could get together in order to stay in the game, and then it finally happened. They landed on Boardwalk and went broke. They were giving up property, they were giving up cash, and pretty soon the first family member dropped out, and I'm busted, I don't have any money, I don't have any property left. And it was down to one other family member, and it wasn't long before they put the knife in, and just, made the point, and they won the game. And as the family got up to leave, they left me sitting there. But I had all the cash, and I had all the property, and I had motels, hotels, I had houses, I had it all. And I was just gloating in my victory as I watched my family tuck their tails and go softly into the den to watch TV. And then I hear them say, "Oh, honey, put the game up, and while you're at it, take the dog out." And boom. Reality set in. And I sat there and I took all this property that I had acquired, and I began to pick the deeds up. I started raking in all the houses and put all the money back in the box and put it back in the closet and took the dog out. It kind of reminds me of another story I read about a very successful entrepreneur in Wall Street who was a very, very busy and important man. He logged in 12 to 14 hours every single day, and a lot of times he would work on the weekends. He had an MBA. He was a part of a lot of professional organizations. In fact, he was on the board of directors of many major companies. When he wasn't at work, his mind would even drift toward work, and he would be thinking about work. He found that a 40-hour week was such a good thing that oftentimes he would do that twice a day and twice a week. He would put in those 40 hours 2 times every week. And his wife tried to tell him and remind him that, hey, you have family. You see, he and his wife were not as close as they once were, and it wasn't that he intended to drift away, it's just that she always seemed to need more time of his, and that time was something that he didn't have. His kids were beginning to miss him. He missed out on those books that he should have been reading with them. He missed out on the games of catch they should have been playing. He wasn't able to make it to the lunches that he should have been eating with them. And after a while, the kids just quit complaining, and that's what they came to accept. "I'll be more available," he would say, "in 6 months." And he said when things began to settle down, and though he was a very, very bright, smart guy, he didn't seem to notice that things never settled down. And then when he would feel guilty about all of this, he would just simply say to himself, "Hey, I'm doing all of this for them. I'm doing all of this for them. Because they live in the house that I'm paying for, they eat the food that I'm paying for, they wear the clothes that I'm buying, they play the video games that I'm providing for them, so I can say I'm doing it all for them." He knew he was not taking care of himself and his body, and his doctor kept telling him. He said, "There's some pretty serious warning signs here. You need to lay off the sweets. Your cholesterol's high. Your blood pressure is a little out of control. You need to get some proper nutrition, and you need to get some proper exercise." So you know what he did? He quit going to the doctor. There was plenty of time for that, he said, when things settled down. He recognized his life was out of balance, and his wife nagged him about going to church. There was one right down the street from where they lived. He prided himself, that Sunday morning was the morning he had, the only day he had to really crash, to really just kind of to rest and to fall apart. And he prided himself on that he was a very practical man who lived in a real world, and money was how you kept score in that world. Besides, he could be spiritual without going to church. There's plenty of time for that when things settle down. One day, the chief operations officer of his company came to see him, and he said, "You won't believe this, but things are booming to such an extent that we can't even keep up. It's a miracle that this is our chance to get the mother lode. I mean, if we catch this wave, then we'll be set for life. But it's going to require some major changes. Inventory headaches you would not believe. Orders coming in faster than we can supply." He said, "We got to overhaul from the top to the bottom." And then it hit this brilliant young business guy. He said, "We need to have a technical revolution in our company. We'll go completely wireless, and we'll be available 24/7 to everyone, everywhere." He even thought up a new company motto that he put on everything they have, and it was simply this: "We live for this. We live for this." This was the opportunity of a lifetime, and he was available to everyone in the world except the ones who mattered most. One night, his wife and the business guy was in a conversation, and he told his wife, he said, "Honey, do you realize what this means? We can relax now. Our future is assured. We're set for life. I've looked at the market. I've covered all the bases, and I've anticipated every contingency. This means financial security. We can finally go on that vacation that you've always wanted to go on." He was master of the board. At 11 o'clock that night, his wife went to bed without him, as usual. For more than a half a century, this man's heart had been pumping 70 milliliters of blood with every contraction, 14,000 pints of blood each day, 100,000 beats every 24 hours. And all of this without ever sending a memo or giving it a performance review. And now all of a sudden it skipped a beat. And then it skipped another. And it skipped another. And suddenly he grasped his chest and he began to gasp for air. And for a moment, just a moment, he was given the gift of blinding clarity. Even though he sat at the top of hundreds of organizational charts and owned more businesses than he could count and have more money than he knew what to do with, it turned out that he wasn't even in control of a single heartbeat. His wife woke up at 3 a.m. and he was still not by her side. And she went downstairs to do what she usually did, and that was to beg him to come on and get in the bed. "You need some rest." And when she went into his study, there he was sitting in front of his laptop with his head on his desk. She began her usual speech, and she reached over and touched him on the shoulder, and when she did, realized he was cold. And she suddenly realized with a sick feeling in her stomach what had happened as she called 911. Paramedics got there. They said that he had had a massive heart attack, died sometime during the night. His death was a major, major story in the financial community. The memorial service came, and because of his prominence, the whole community turned out, and people filed past his coffin, and they said what people usually say, the dumb things people usually say when they file past coffins is they look so peaceful, or I wonder what happened to all the stuff that he had. He left it. He left it all. Everybody does. Everybody leaves it all. And the master of the board was no longer master of the board because the game had ended. You may recognize this story. It's actually a story that was told hundreds of centuries ago. A story that Jesus himself told, and it was found in Luke chapter 12, and he talked about a rich fool who had everything and then one day lost it all. Jesus doesn't say in the story, he doesn't say that the fool was a bad man. He doesn't say he was an evil man. He just calls him a fool. He simply devoted his life to the wrong things. He didn't set out to neglect his wife and kids. He didn't set out with a goal of, I'm going to become greedy. He didn't set out with a goal of, hey, I'm going to not have compassion for the poor. He was just a busy person, and he got caught up playing the game. If we looked at his priority list, it probably went something like this. It is harvest a large crop, build bigger barns, achieve financial security, eat, drink, and play. And oh yeah, don't forget not to die. That last one is really, really hard. Because sooner or later, our souls will return to our Maker. And the things that we've accumulated, the things that we've gathered in this life and we fought over in this life, whose will they be? When Jesus told this story, he summed it up in a single sentence. He told this story and he said, I don't want you to miss the point of the story. So I'm going to sum up this whole story in a single sentence so that you can't miss the point that I'm trying to make. And this is the point Jesus said. Back up. Verse 21. This is how it will be. This is the end game. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. You see, according to Jesus, he said that the end game, the object of the game, the object of life, he said it is breathtakingly simple. I mean, it's amazingly simple. Jesus said this is the end game, is to be rich toward God. Don't spend your one and only life trying to play master of the game or master of the board, because you can't win this game. But you can be rich toward God. Your life, with God's help, it can be a source of pleasure. It can be a source of honor to God, and it can be a blessing to other people. See, because here's the thing. When the game is over, all that matters is God's assessment of our lives. God's assessment of our lives. Winning at what really counts. Winning at what matters the most. You see, we'll all stand, whether we're rich or whether we're poor, whether we're a Hollywood star or we're just a no-name face in a crowd, whether we're the star athlete or star student or we're the one that sits at the table by ourselves that no one wants to be around. It doesn't matter who we are, if we're a business owner or if we're a minimum wage worker. We will all stand on level ground before God as He assesses our lives. What does being rich toward God mean? It means several things. It's growing a soul that's increasingly healthy and good. It's loving and enjoying the people who are around us. It's being generous with our stuff and doing good works in His name for others. It's making that which is temporal servant of that which is eternal. No one can do these things and be poor in God's eyes, and no one cannot do these things and be rich in God's eyes. But what does it mean really to be rich toward God? Jesus simplified this whole thing in a statement He made in Matthew chapter 22. And Jesus summed up what it means to be rich toward God. Let's look at this. Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophet are based on these two commands." He said, here it is in a nutshell. Let me break it down for you. To be rich toward God means, first of all, this. It means that you love God. That you love God. Being rich toward God, it's simply this. It's giving God that which He desires most from you. And you know what He desires most from you? It's not your money. It's not your checkbook. It's not your house. It's not your firstborn. It's not all these other things. The thing God desires most from you is you. You. To love God with our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. He said to be rich toward God is to give God that which God wants most. And that's you. And just as God has given us many wonderful gifts and things that we're thankful for, the best gift that God ever gave us was Himself. It was Himself. We can offer God our resources, we can offer Him our acts of service, but the gift that God desires most from us is the gift of ourself. In fact, Jesus, in one of the last conversations He had with the Apostle Paul, Peter, and here was Peter. Peter had followed Jesus. Peter had served Jesus. Peter had learned from Jesus. Peter had told other people about Jesus. Peter had doubted Jesus at one time. Peter had praised Him, and Peter had denied Him. And yet, here we are, final conversation between Jesus and Peter. And Jesus says, I have one final question for you, Peter. Do you love me? In fact, He asked this question 3 times in the conversation. Peter, do you love me? In other words, He was saying, Peter, do I have you? Peter, do I really have you? Do you love me? And then He would go on to tell Peter what He wanted him to do. But what He wanted most was Peter's love. You know, in a sense, the Bible is a story of God's single greatest desire. The reason that He created people in the very beginning was to have a people to be close to be with. He created Adam and Eve, and the Scripture said that God would come down in the cool of the day and He would walk with them because He wanted to be with people. Man sinned and he was separated from the garden, and yet God didn't give up. God said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a people that I can be with. And I'm going to call this nation Israel. And I'm going to create this people, this nation, this group that I can be with. And He went as far as to say that I'll be their God and they will be my people. So He created this group, this people to be with as He formed a nation. And even that wasn't enough, so God finally said, you know what? I'm going to go down to earth. I'm going to go as a baby in Bethlehem. I'm going to go as a man, God with us. I'm going to go down there, grow up there, call people to follow me, and to come be with me. In fact, Jesus made this statement here. He said, anyone who loves me and will obey my teaching, my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. It says, if each day God is saying, hey, I want to spend the day with you. And I know this may sound a little crazy because I love God and I believe there's no one else worth giving my life to. But sometimes because of my busyness and my selfishness, I want to be alone. I want to hide from God. I want to hide from God so I can serve myself and cater to my selfish desires. You see, here's the thing. I can't love God more by willpower alone, but I can choose to be with Him every day as I go through the day, learning to see His goodness in all that's around me and learning to hear His voice through others and through what I read, so I can thank Him at the end of the day and say, thank you, God, for your presence with me. You see, the more time I spend with Him, the more I come to know Him. And love is a byproduct of knowing God. The Scripture says God is love. So I can spend the day. I can love God by spending time with Him. And he said, this is what it means to be rich toward God, is to love God. And then the second thing that marks a life that is rich toward God, he said, not only do you love God, he said, but you love people. You love people. John Ortberg, in one of his books, he shares of a recent trip, or a trip that he had taken to Ethiopia. And he just talked about the overwhelming magnitude of the poverty that he found there. And in interacting with the people, he had one man come to him and say this. He said, in the West, you measure a man's wealth by his possessions. In this country, we measure his wealth by his friends. We measure wealth by friends. Love people. Being rich toward God involves loving and investing in people. We need to be reminded of this every single day. You know, maybe the best way to see the value in loving people is through this kind of simple illustration. I got some sticky notes, and on this note is a T. And that T stands for temporal. It means it won't last. It'll fade. This keyboard, sorry about that, Mark. That keyboard's temporal. This TV, that's temporal. This table, it's temporal. In fact, we could go through most everything that we have. Our technology, our toys, our money, our house, our cars, our vacation, everything that you could go through and start putting things on it that says temporal. I could take you to multiple places in our town today that specializes in selling temporal stuff. It's all temporal. It's all temporal. If you're living with what you see with a green tag on it, then you know you're living for what is temporal. It brings temporal satisfaction. It brings temporal fulfillment. It brings temporary meaning to life. It will come to an end, but you will not. The temporal will leave you with a sense of emptiness. Temporal. Everybody say that word with me. Temporal. We need to grasp that. Temporal. It's a word that never appears in TV commercials. They never say, buy this car and it'll give you temporary pleasure until a newer model comes out or until this one starts tearing up. They never advertise, buy this product. It's temporary because we'll come out with a new updated version next month. They never use that word. They never use it, so we buy it thinking it's going to bring satisfaction and wholeness to us. In fact, it's the one word that might have saved this young fool's life if he could have just understood all this stuff is temporal. You see, everything in this room is temporal except one thing. Everything in this room is temporal except one thing. Joey? Buddy, you're eternal. Don't look at me like that. Carly, you're eternal. You're eternal. While I'm putting them on, I guess I could put one on myself. Only one thing in this room will last forever, and that's people. People. People will last forever. When you get to the end of your life and you take your last breath, what do you want your life to have been about? What will make you rich in the eyes of God? It's loving Him and loving people. I hope you get this statement right here. I hope it just You can't get it out of your head, but wise people build their lives around what is eternal, and they squeeze in what is temporary, not the other way around. Just going to let that sit there for a minute and simmer. Wise people build their lives around what is eternal and squeeze in what is temporary. I don't know about you, but I often get this totally reversed, and my life is about what's temporary, and I try to squeeze in what's eternal. In fact, here's an exercise I want you to try. Maybe you can do it this afternoon over the course of this next week, is get you some sticky pads. And on one, write temporal, and on the other one, write eternal. And start going through your home. Start going through your life and marking what is going to last forever and what is temporary. Maybe take it a step further. Start today. Just start placing these sticky notes where you can see them. Place them on the things that you need to be reminded of. That, hey, this car is not eternal. This home is not eternal. This bank statement, that's not eternal. And start placing it on the things that are temporary in our life. And then take the other notepad, sticky notes, and start placing them on what is eternal. Put one on your spouse. Put one on your kids. Put one on your friends. Put one on your neighbor. Well, be careful with that one, but just imagining doing this. Put one on the person that's checking you out. Put one on the person that's going to wait on your table today when you go to lunch. Here's one. Put one on that person that you can't stand. And while you're at it, go ahead and put one on yourself. All this stuff is temporary. There'll be a day when our 401ks and our bank accounts will be totally irrelevant. The titles that were on our resumes, they will no longer impress anyone. Our GPAs, the ACT scores, our trophies, our awards, they'll long be forgotten. No one will know what clothes hung in our closet and what cars were parked in our garages. It won't matter the house that you had or the neighborhood that you lived in. It won't even matter what position you held. All that will be left is what you had done for God and done for others. So the object of life, the object of the game, is to be rich toward God. And it's our job to determine what is eternal and what is temporal, what all goes back into the box. And only what's done out of our love for God and love for others will go with us into eternity. My grandmother, I've shared before, but she had a plaque, I'll never forget, that hung in her house and said, "Only one life will soon be passed, and only what is done for Christ will last." Let me try to reframe this one more way before we wrap up. Let me put it this way. Imagine investing and acquiring everything in this life. Imagine it's like this, that you sell your house, you sell your cars, you sell your furniture, you sell everything that you can sell. You even sell your kids in order to get enough money to go on that 3-week dream vacation that you've always wanted to go on. I mean, it is going to be something. It's what you've always dreamed of. It's going to be fabulous. I mean, it's just going to be awesome. And you sell everything that you have in order to go on this 3-week vacation. And at the end of the 3 weeks, you come back and you're broke and you're filled with a lot of regrets. Yet so many people in this life, they work, they acquire, they gather all they can, which is never enough, only to find out that this stuff doesn't last. In fact, in the grand scheme of things, we'll spend way more time on the other side of death than we do on this side of death. And what a shame to have spent this entire life trying to master the game, trying to get the most, trying to win the game, when the game wasn't even the main thing. So often we forget and we forfeit everything now in order, and then we lose out eternity. Jesus made this statement. He said, don't store up treasures here on earth where moth eats them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. And this is the thing. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. You see, Jesus made it abundantly clear that having the wrong treasure leads our hearts to the wrong places. And here's the thing. What we treasure the most controls us. What we treasure the most, that's what controls us. When I play this game, I get caught up in it. I get caught up to the point that my family's like ready to just slap me and lock me in a closet somewhere until I simmer down. I get caught up in playing the game. I love the game. I love the adrenaline. I love to acquire stuff. I get caught up in playing this game. And I lose sight of the fact that there's an end to this game. And at the end of this game, all this stuff goes back into a box. And there's such an empty feeling when I walk away from this game. Even though I won, I'm left putting up all the money and all the deeds and the dice and the houses and the hotels, and I'm putting it all back into the box. And when I put it back in the box and the box is put up, we don't talk about the game anymore. We don't sit around weeks later going, boy, you remember all that money you had in that game, and you remember getting boardwalk, and you had this. We don't even talk about the game. It's forgotten. It all goes back in the box. Game over. I thought about some words that Jesus spoke in Mark chapter 8, and he said this statement, and I'll leave this with you. Jesus says, what does it profit, or what will it benefit you if you gain the whole world and you lose your own soul? I don't want to live that way. I don't want to live like that. There's too much at stake. I don't want to win at what doesn't matter and lose at what matters the most. I want to know that when this temporary life is over, I want riches where it really counts. I want riches in heaven. I want the richness of God in a relationship with Him. I don't want to be the fool in Jesus' story. I want to have lived this life rich toward God. I want to have lived loving God with all of my heart, all of my soul, mind, and strength. And I want to live knowing I have loved people who were made in God's image.